As the athletes gear up for next month's Summer Olympics in Seoul, South Korea, worries are increasing that student rioting could cast a shadow over the Games. Waves of riot police Monday broke up a gathering of some 3,000 students who tried to march to the North Korean border for talks on reunification. The students have staged anti-government riots for months now. As the students grow more radical, the police force against them becomes more brutal. South Korean President Roh Tae-woo proposed on Monday an unprecedented summit with North Korea. There are many issues in this conflict, and we have with us two people in Washington to help sort them out. The Reverend Dennis McNamara is a Jesuit priest who returned just last week from South Korea, where he was a teacher and a Fulbright scholar. Sung-il Choi is chairman of the United Movement for Democracy and Unification in Korea. I guess first, you know, a little more than a year ago, when I was last in Korea, we thought that the problems had basically been solved. There were these tremendous riots. They forced President Chun Do-hwan from power, basically, or forced him to agree to democratization. And now it's flaring up again. And I don't know if it's been quite as bad as it was a year ago, but that almost is an irrelevant measurement. Reverend McNamara, how do you explain this, that it started all over again despite a democratically elected president, democratically elected legislature, and so on?
Well, there's a couple of issues there. One is the tradition of student activism. It's, well, better than a 100-year tradition of students taking very strong moral stands on issues of the polity and society. And students are continuing that, and they'll keep to that tradition, I think, despite whatever political changes there are. Another thing I think that's important to keep in mind is Korea under Park Chung-hee and Chun Do-hwan was a very tight society. There was very few channels for political dissent. With the change to Roh Tae-woo, there is more openness, more political dissent permitted. But when you change from a very, very tight situation, even to a somewhat moderated situation now of at least limited political dissent, you can't expect the students who had been repressed to such a degree for so long suddenly to say, oh, this is fine, this is just what we want.
But why not? Why can't they buy into this and say, look, we have an opportunity now to...
Well, a couple of things. First, they don't have the channels yet. The opposition parties are still split. The opposition parties have great difficulty dealing with the students now. It used to be the government's problem. The opposition party is not finding it any easier to deal with the students. There aren't constructive channels for student opinion, student ideas to come into government as yet. That will take some time. Secondly, the students themselves are organization. There's, when you talk about a student demonstration from any one campus, there's usually a very small number of students that are involved. A large number of students, therefore, are studying on campuses. One campus I was on this past fall, they actually threw out the student leaders because they were too radical. Now, that's not typical of the other campuses, but there is a lot of factionalism among the students. The certain students who are demonstrating are representing their own ideas rather than representing a broad spectrum of the students. I think in time, however, they will become better organized, and we might find a somewhat more moderate, but I think a more insightful student movement in Korea.
Dr. Choi, do you think these students, you know, wanting to march to the border with North Korea, that's not an easy place to get to with all these embattlements along the way and all the barriers and so on. Do they really believe that they can march to the North Korean border and when they get there, have talks with North... I mean, isn't it true that if they got to the North Korean border, they'd probably be arrested by the North Koreans and thrown in jail, wouldn't they? I mean, if they really crossed the border?
Probably it might evoke a different kind of reaction from the North Korean government. They probably will welcome them with bouquets of flowers and whatnot.
You think they would?
The important point here is the students, I'm not so sure, are really intent on touching their feet on the DMZ and cross the border. I think, you know, all they're trying to do is to highlight the issue.
So it's symbolic.
And keep it visible and keep it on the public agenda. I think that's what they're trying to do.
Are they possibly unrealistically romantic about North Korea? Do they think that North Korea might be a good place? I mean, it is said, I haven't been to North Korea, I've been to South Korea, but it is said that North Korea is one of the most repressive regimes in the world.
Well, if the North Korean people are totally incapable of opening up their system from within, then obviously I think the South Korean students feel that they should contribute towards the liberalization of North Korea. And I think, you know, as one nation divided into two states, I think this is a rather natural, youthful sentiment. But I think what we have to, understand I would like to comment on
Sure.
what Reverend McNamara has just stated, is that the reason all these issues are perking up again, first of all, is because the kinds of problems that the South Korean nation has had to deal with, they are the kinds of problems that have accumulated over decades and centuries.
Sure.
And therefore, they are not amenable to a quick sledgehammer approach type of solutions. The second, I think, is
well,
that...
this rapid industrialization has caused a lot of
right,
problems, hasn't it?
and you cannot undo the wrongs that have accumulated over such a long period
The
of time.
inequities, you mean?
The inequities we have, and also especially the disparate situation that you have between male-female workers, which also is a reflection of the culture itself. Also, all the apparatuses of the dictatorship, they're still very much in place, and this is why the students feel very uncomfortable about the present regime, even though there has been a lot of image recasting.
Well, let's ask Reverend McNamara, who's spent a lot of time there, have there been a lot of changes under this new regime since No Tae-woo came to power, which is about 6 months ago, I guess, a little more?
There have been changes. It's, in a sense, you get a step forward, a half step backward, a step forward, half step backward. That's the sense you get. No Tae-woo, obviously, is not fully in charge in the sense that Chun Doo-hwan or Park Chung-hee were. No Tae-woo still
He's not
has...
a dictator in that sense.
Well, he's not only not a dictator, he still has many of Chun Doo-hwan's people within the government. That's a very strong group within the government, and he has to deal with them as he tries to bring along his own people. So he also has a split legislature. He has the opposition suddenly with the assembly elections in the spring. The opposition is now a very strong voice, has a very strong voice in the legislature. So it's a very unique situation, really, for Chun Doo-hwan, something the Korean government
For No Tae-woo, you mean?
For No Tae-woo, yes.
Right. Is he sincere in trying to make changes, do you think? I mean, he worked with the previous dictator quite closely. Mm-hmm. Does he have, in fact, a different vision of what South Korea ought to be?
Whether he does or not, he doesn't have any choice. South Korea is different. The population is better educated. The population is economically more secure. The population is more aware of both domestic and international issues. The government can no longer take up the North Korean issue and say, because of North Korea, the danger from North Korea, we have to have a very repressed society in the South. That's no longer an option.
That's been an excuse for a long time for repression in the South, that if we don't watch out, the North will invade, we'll be in trouble.
Yes, yes.
And can't do that anymore.
That kind of thing cannot be done. So No Tae-woo has a much different situation than his predecessors did. As regards his sincerity, I can't comment on his sincerity. He does seem to have made some moves which I think are very positive. The most immediate that I think of is the moves with the media.
We'll come back and talk more about that in just a few minutes. We'll be back with Night Watch.
As anyone who reads the Wall Street Journal can tell you, it takes money to make money. Specifically, it takes 47 cents a day.
Call 800-327-8400 for this great journal subscription offer. 13 weeks for just $29.75 with a money-back guarantee. 13 weeks, $29.75. Phone 800-327-8400 now for the Wall Street Journal.
Dentists warn, the #1 dental problem isn't cavities. It isn't tartar. It's plaque, building up on your teeth every day. And no matter how much you brush, you don't get enough plaque off your teeth, especially in hard-to-reach places. The problem is plaque. The solution is Plaques. Rinse with Plaques before brushing, and you can remove 300% more plaque than brushing alone. Plaques, original flavor and soft mint, removes 300% more plaque than brushing alone.
Crazy glue, strong enough to hold this man suspended in midair. Bonds almost anything.
And try Crazy Glue Plus. It bonds more surfaces than any other glue. Metal, plastic, wood, ceramic, rubber, and all fabrics. And it fills gaps, too.
From Maryland to Texas, Detroit to Old St. Louis, the country's gone crazy. Crazy, crazy glue. We're fixing and repairing. Things are looking good as new. The country's gone crazy.
With Crazy Glue Plus.
Crazy, crazy glue.
The making of freeze-dried Taster's Choice coffee. Search the world for the finest coffee beans. Grind them and the peak of freshness, brew the richest, most aromatic coffee you can brew. Then freeze it. Freeze-drying locks in the fresh brewed aroma and flavor until you release it. For a truly superior cup of coffee, the choice for taste is Taster's Choice.
Taste it.
We're back talking about events in Korea this week as the Olympics approach. Reverend McNamara, you said that you think that President Roh Tae-woo has made some important changes with regard to the media. What are those?
Well, the government has relented on some of the censorship efforts in the media, and there are now laws that are being discussed which would actually give the media greater legal protection against government intervention. Now, this kind of change has been begun by the Roh Tae-woo government. It's certainly going to take a long time to implement. One of the problems is within the media itself. Suddenly, you cannot have a media that's uncontrolled be totally responsible and have...
it's a big change overnight. So there's going to be tension.
Doing that. But the change will take time, but I think at least that one single change, that change is in place.
Dr. Choi, what about some changes that are needed or that people are waiting for might not have occurred?
Well, the most immediate counterexample to what Reverend McNamara has just pointed out is the continuing incarceration of possibly 1,000.
1,000?
1,000, they are, they contend.
Prisoners of conscience, they're called. What does that mean? Who are they?
Well, they are former journalists, former intellectuals, who staged this brave resistance against the previous dictatorship. And one wonders why, in spite of President and candidate Roh Tae-woo's pledge to implement the immediate, unconditional, total amnesty of the prisoners of conscience, why such a high number of prisoners of conscience still remain in prison?
Let me ask you if you think that people in South Korea are really serious about reunification. I mean, I know there's a ministry of reunification, this is a slogan people have to talk about, but do South Koreans really want this to become one country again?
There was a poll comparable to the Gallup poll in America, which found out that about 38% of the Korean people, they believe that reunification is one issue that would have to be addressed immediately.
I mean, I could see people wanting to visits across the borders. I mean, things like East and West Germany have done. That's a far cry from real unification. Would it work? I mean, the population's so much smaller in the north, the industrialization is so much less. How would Korea
Well, they're actually
handle it?
complementary economies. I think
Are they?
In that sense it will work quite well. Resources in the north that the south could use
So the north
very
would
well.
provide the raw materials for the south's manufactured
Well, for the
products,
time being, the North, I mean, is with an educated population and such. I think if the North had the tools, the technology, they would be on many things. Natural relations and with China and Russia, which South Korea has been pressing very hard for. I think it's important to keep in mind, though, it's something that's hard for Americans to understand, and that is your own country being divided. The Civil War is really faded for the most part from our memory. It's the only comparable experience we have.
Sure.
And on an emotional level, that's a very, very profound issue. I think when many South Koreans speak of reunification, it's an assumption that having North Korea together is good. Now, these practical details of how to do it, that's another issue.
But they're not just details. They're very big issues, aren't there? I mean, politically, the issue of how you establish a political system between a communist dictatorship and what has been a military dictatorship of a different sort is now a more democratic government. I mean, how do you bring them together?
Well, that's a very valid point. What you're pointing to right now is that the division of the Korean Peninsula was an international decision that was brought about by the superpowers. It was not a Korean decision in the first place, and therefore, unless international climate changes, I'm not so sure that reunification in the sense that you're talking about can come about.
What about the American role in Korea? The United States saved this country in some ways, in a very important way, from being gobbled up.
If I may, the first phase of the American presence in Korea obviously produced a groundswell of friendship and respect. There's no question about that. But that quickly went down the drain starting from 1980 because of this widespread perception of U.S. complicity in the Gwangju massacre, which was the sort of the watershed event in the coming of the Chun Doo-hwan dictatorship. In spite of repeated U.S. official denials of any U.S. role in this, I'm not so sure the United States has really done a convincing job.
Well, in any event, there are people who believe that the United States was involved, and so that has stoked the resentment against the United States.
The most important point that comes out of all this is that it made people question, why do we need U.S. troops in South Korea? Are they there to help us defend ourselves against North Korea, or are they there to prop up a troubled dictatorship? And
well, the dictatorship's gone now. The troops are still there. Did you find a lot of resentment against the American troops in Korea, Reverend McNamara?
There is some resentment against the American troops. I think the
Let's talk about moving that big base out of the middle of Seoul now.
Yes, the Yongsan base. Of course, it takes up a beautiful piece of property right in Seoul. It would be a wonderful public park if it could be...
There's a golf course in there,
yes, it's unfortunate. That needs to be taken out.
It's a symbol that may not wear very well on a lot of Koreans.
Yes. But I think I really think the basic issue with the American-Korean relations today is more on the economic side. It's the opening of markets that people resent in Korea, and it's very hard for Korea to have to constantly open their markets and respond to the very strong demands from the United States on opening markets. And it's something that seems unbalanced for us here.
Seems very unbalanced for us here.
We would expect an open market there just as we have an open market here. Of course, Korea is in a much different situation than Japan. They don't feel the comparison between Japan and the United States and Korea and the United States is fair. But I think that's where you find the American problem. I really don't think the American problem is so much the Gwangju incident. I don't think the American problem is basically the strategic issue. I don't think there's a lot of Koreans that really want the American troops out of Korea.
Last question, very briefly. Will the Olympics be spoiled? Not very long now away, about a month from now. Will the Olympics be spoiled by the demonstrating students, by the clashes with the government?
There will be numerous intense attempts at disrupting the Olympics.
What do you think?
I think you might smell some tear gas. I don't think there'll be any disruption.
Reverend McNamara, Dr. Choi, thank you very much for joining us on Night Watch.
And there was a bad auto accident on the Penn Lincoln Parkway East this afternoon.
The times that we shared, the years we were there, KDK, ATV, and you, yeah, we've done it all together. KD and you, there's nothing any better. Picture of you, we are the picture of you in all we do. KD and you, smiles we remember, hearts full of laughter, the hopes, the dreams that make a winning team. KD and you, the times that we've known. KD and you, bringing it home. Picture the two of us and all we do. KD and you.
Spina bifida is the #1 crippling birth defect in America, so KD is teaming up with Mike Webster in hopes that you'll support a special program to help fight the disease.
During the month of August, when you buy any one of hundreds of items at your local food store, a donation will be made to the Spina Bifida Association of Western Pennsylvania, and the money goes directly to helping some special kids in our area, like little Kaylin here.
Throughout the month of August, look for special banners at your local grocery store, and together, KD and you can make a difference.
Hi, I'm Keith Willis of the Pittsburgh Steelers. To win in football, it takes teamwork. Here at the Sickle Cell Society, it takes more than just teamwork. It takes you. Without your support, the Sickle Cell Society cannot win in its fight against sickle cell disease. So please help and support the Society's team of professional healthcare providers. Call 371-0628. 371-0628.
Today is the 11th anniversary of the death of Elvis Presley. Now there's a book out which raises the question whether Elvis is really dead. And residents in Kalamazoo, Michigan said this summer that they had seen Elvis at fast food restaurants and a shopping mall. There have been other scattered reports of sightings of the king as well. We've invited 3 guests to discuss what the renewed Elvis mania is all about. Richard Peterson is a professor of sociology at Vanderbilt University in Nashville. He teaches about Elvis in his classes on popular culture. Rick Saucedo is a well-known Elvis impersonator from Chicago, who's been imitating Elvis for 17 years. And Gail Brewer-Giorgio is the author of Is Elvis Alive?, a best-selling book that comes with a tape that's supposed to be the voice of Elvis. She joins us from the CBS Bureau in Atlanta. I'd like to start with you, Gail, and ask you whether you personally really believe that Elvis Presley is still alive.
Well, I believe there is enough evidence, certainly, to raise the question. I haven't personally seen him. I've talked to people who said they have seen him. I think when you go back to the very day, I call it day 1, August 16th, 1977, there had been questions almost immediately about the cause of death. We had doctors arguing with each other. Not long after that, if you skip ahead a bit to 79, you had 2020 doing an entire investigation on the cover-up in the death of Elvis. Of course, they were looking into a drug connection. Nonetheless, they brought out some astonishing information. They said it was the worst medical investigation ever done. The Memphis police had officially closed the case within hours after the death. There was no coroner's inquest. 2020 reported that all stomach contents had been destroyed pre-autopsy, which certainly negates a thorough autopsy. They also reported that all autopsy remains had been destroyed. They said there were all toxicology reports, all photographs, and all documentation having to do with Elvis Presley was missing from the official files. Now, that was 2020 reporting that. My book, actually, Sandy and Richard, is that I have taken what the media has already had. It looked like little firecrackers out there of information, and we've put it together, and it sort of caused an explosion. There was a death certificate that raised questions, or at least the copy of it did, that stated the body that was buried weighed 170 pounds. It also stated rigor mortis had set in, while the police report states the body was found unconscious. We talk about the date on the death certificate, which is October of 77 and not August of 77. That certainly raised questions.
Let me interrupt you, because you have quite a catalog of things you can discuss there. And I guess some of these are more disturbing than others. Some of them, I suppose, could be dismissed as, you know, if you were typing the death certificate for Elvis Presley and you were in Memphis, Tennessee, you might be a little nervous. I mean, you might type October rather than August, it seems. Right. You might be all shook up, as Professor Peterson says. That's right. You know, some of this, I almost feel like we ought to tell people, no, it is not April 1st. We're not, you know, we're really doing this on August 16th, not on April 1st. Yeah. You really mean it.
Well, I hope 2020 meant it when they presented it.
Well, I understand. I mean, there are a lot of things, the deaths of famous people. I mean, there are still questions being raised about the Kennedy assassination in 1963.
Sure, Marilyn Monroe.
25 years ago, Marilyn Monroe's death. Anytime somebody who is particularly famous dies, there are questions that are raised. There's no doubt about that.
Were you ever satisfied with the conclusion reached, though, on the death of Elvis?
Was I satisfied personally? Well, let me ask Professor Peterson, who has looked at the interest in Elvis. Pete Peterson, were you satisfied? Do you?
Well, really, that's not the question.
That's not what interests you most of all.
No, I'm interested in people's beliefs and people's attitudes and so on. And
do you think their beliefs and their attitudes and their interest in Elvis might cause them to believe something that would otherwise be implausible?
Well, for many people, whether he's dead or alive isn't the ultimate question. For them, he is alive in a very special way, that they treasure him and carry him around with them like a loved one that they can still talk to.
So they're prepared.
That's independent, in a sense, of whether the historical Elvis Presley is dead or alive. He is alive in their hearts, in their memories, in their minds. They have memorabilia of him, they have records, they bring him back. He has become part of them in a way. So that that's the question. And then he becomes more alive in a way when people keep talking about him, and people like Rick do impersonations or do, I mean, keep the image alive. And Rick is one who doesn't just doesn't do the old songs, but in a sense keeps Elvis up to date, as it were.
Gail, are you one of those people? Are you somebody who has been so interested in Elvis Presley that you are perhaps more able to think of him as being alive, trust the sightings and so on, because of your own interest in him?
Not actually. I was never an Elvis Presley fan per se. I've never been to a concert, and I don't to this day even have a record album. Actually, my interest started with Elvis from a journalistic viewpoint. I've written for newspapers, worked in radio and so forth. And the very day that we heard the news, I was really caught up in watching a very mortal man being deified before our eyes, which is probably what Richard might be talking about too. Right. They were already talking about pilgrimages to the Holy Shrine, and they talk about Elvis's Memphis Mafia often in terms of his disciples. That's sort of scary when you think about it.
Has he been deified?
I think in a very real way. At the beginning, it looked like it might be nostalgia or what have you, but the tremendous reality he has is a kind of process of deification.
We need some of our gods to be sort of bad boys.
Well, we don't have that many saints in this country. We don't have a whole panoply of saints, and so he is a very real one for many people. And just as Rudolph Valentino in his day lived long after he died. And when I was a kid, James Dean was the person. There are all kinds of stories about James Dean still living, and I think people come to associate many good things with and in their lives with some media person, and they become very real. And for them, for some of these people, it would be kind of, if he came back, that would be a big disappointment, because he'd come back, an old guy.
Live up to that image. I mean, we'll come back in a minute and talk to a person who I take it makes his living impersonating Elvis, Rick Saucedo. We'll be right back with Nightwatch.
One way to find a job is to look in publications. Lots of publications.
Any luck?
Well, I've got newspapers, magazines, trade papers.
Find anything yet?
Newsletters, phone books, you name it.
There's a better way to find a better job.
Honey, look at this.
The National Business Employment Weekly.
It's published by the Wall Street Journal. It lists hundreds of high-paying jobs all across the country.
Now, what about managerial jobs?
Managerial, professional, technical, sales like mine. It even has articles on interviewing, writing a better resume, and how to succeed once you get the job.
What am I doing with all of these, now that I have the National Business Employment Weekly?
Pick up the National Business Employment Weekly at a newsstand or call 800-842-4400 and receive 8 issues by first-class mail for only $35. 800-842-4400. The National Business Employment Weekly.
Don't make a career move without it.
You have a bright idea. You've thought of an innovative new product. So the question is, what do you do now? The answer? Call the Innovation Center in Washington, D.C. for free information. Call 1-800-628-2828. The Innovation Center attends invention trade shows all over the world and sells new products through the Invention Store. So, if you have an invention or just an idea, call the Innovation Center at 1-800-628-2828.
It takes more than years of training to make it to the Olympics. It takes a lot of support. And you can help support the Olympic dream, because when you clip coupons for selected 3M products, 3M will make a contribution to the United States Olympic team. It's a way for you to help make an athlete's dream come true. Check your Sunday paper for this ad and look for these 3M products. 3M, supporting the dream.
Back on Nightwatch talking about Elvis Presley, the 11th anniversary of his death. Rick Saucedo, you're from Chicago.
Sam.
And you, is it a job? I mean, is it a full-time job, actually?
Yeah.
Impersonating Elvis Presley?
I've been doing it for 17 years.
And you have no other job?
No,
you don't go to work as something else and then at night put on your Elvis outfit.
It would be hard to have a job because I don't know. I'm afraid to.
Why?
I don't know. I feel how people would react towards me if I worked at a regular job.
What are some of your engagements? I mean, how do you spend your time?
Fishing. on my days off.
You must not make a lot of money then.
Oh, no,
but
I make enough.
What's the market for Elvis impersonators? What do you
It's
do?
the markups up there. A lot of people like seeing the aura about Elvis, you know.
Do you do it in clubs? I mean,
you do it in clubs. You can do it in. We basically
You do
like
concerts?
in the summer we do a lot of concerts.
You have a backup band?
Oh,
Is
yeah.
that it?
Yeah.
And
We have a group called Johnny Star and the Meteors.
And where do you do your concerts? In Chicago? Or
Yeah.
around the country? Elsewhere too?
We do different, different states and that.
Why do I think that you should be appearing someplace in Las Vegas? I mean, that would be a place that people would be interested in.
Well,
Elvis impersonator.
I was doing a lot of traveling, before I got married, and I had a little baby girl, and I kind of like staying around the area and spend a lot of time with her also.
When you are out and around, when you're at you haven't been in Kalamazoo in the last few weeks, have you?
No, I've
missed that.
This place where
I've been cited in Peoria.
You've been cited in Peoria. But when you're out and around, do people sort of come up to you and mistake you for Elvis Presley?
No, because I'm not that old looking.
No, yeah.
That's what I've been.
So you don't get sort of mobbed by people who want to cut a piece of your jacket off or something?
Not even during the show or after the show?
We've had. I joke around a lot. For instance, we have police security, and I'll grab a scarf and I'll put it right in front of them, just so they mob him. I do little nasty tricks like that.
Is there any possibility, Gail? I want to ask you this.
Sure.
When people say they're citing Elvis Presley around, maybe they're citing people like Rick Saucedo, and there must be quite a few. I mean, how many Elvis impersonators are there in this country? There must be.
Depends how many Washington dollars there are.
Right,
Sure.
there are a lot, quite a few, I bet.
Yeah.
Maybe they're seeing people like Rick.
Yeah, because in fact, if Elvis is alive, that's probably his cover, that there's probably so many people looking like him.
Wait,
Yeah.
You say if he's alive, that's probably his cover. If he were alive, why should he want a cover? I mean, here's a guy who could make a fortune if he's alive, who could have all this, this acclaim and fame and publicity. Why would he
fake his death?
Why would he run for cover? Sure.
Well, apparently, in a new book that's out, which is Elvis and the Colonel, it really goes into the fact that the Colonel was tied up in some pretty interesting things in Vegas.
This is his manager.
Yeah, Colonel Tom Parker. And in fact, provided Elvis to the Hilton International in order to pay off his gambling debts. Elvis was only making $125,000 a week, and Elvis found out about that. Yeah, I know. We really have to tighten, don't we? I would like to tell Rick a real funny story that I heard recently. A couple years before Elvis left, there was a call in Memphis for Elvis lookalikes and sound-alikes, and I understand Elvis always felt that was quite a tribute. But he normally, his hair had turned gray, so he dyed his hair black, real black, and put on his best Elvis outfit and the purple shades and went down there with a room full of lookalikes, and he actually tried out and did not make it.
The reality was not as good as the imitation in this case. That's the story, anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say I don't really believe the premise that Elvis Presley's alive. I just don't. Do you believe it, Rick? Do you think he might be alive?
I tend to shy away.
Is it good for your business to think he's alive?
I don't look at it as that. See, the thing is, I tend to shy away of it because of the fact that a man who's been in the entertainment field that long has not done anything to actually, like, I go nuts after 7 days of not working. I got to get back out there. I get, bad moods and that. Yeah. And to be out of it for 10 years, that
seems a little hard to imagine.
See, but then again, the picture that I seen Gail holding, it's just,
Picture? It's you were holding a picture, Gail?
I was watching earlier.
Yes.
Yeah.
What's this picture?
And the show.
Maybe she should show it to us.
Could you show it, Gail?
Do we have that picture? Right.
Right.
Can you see it?
Well, I think we
at
have
the bottom part of there's Elvis staring out of there.
Staring out the window.
Yeah, that was actually taken by a Chicago businessman at Graceland 4 months after the death. That's the door to the pool house, We have all the negatives in sequence. They've been uncut and sent to Kodak. Kodak has verified that there's no superimposement, nothing doctored. They even checked the emulsion date. And it's very interesting because he's sitting in a position like Elvis often sat in. I've been saying, you know, it looks like a duck, talks like a duck, walks like a duck. Maybe it's a duck.
Pete Peterson, you're a professor of sociology.
Thanks.
What does all this mean? How long is it going to last? I mean, a year from now, I suppose people will be talking about the death of Elvis. All anniversaries will be celebrated. What?
Well, that is an interesting question, how long such a thing would go on. I think the more it becomes revivified through these new disclosures and so on, young people start joining in, people who could not have had any association, weren't born.
Have no idea.
Yeah,
that's right.
Sure.
Matter of fact, on that notion is like these concerts that we've been doing. Matter of fact, this year I've noticed so much that I've seen like real young kids in front of the stage. I mean, hundreds of them.
Yeah.
So it's going to last. It's going to be with us for a long time.
I think it will until a whole new kind of generation, until
the
someone
kind
else
of life, replaces him.
Yeah, until the kind of life that he led no longer has meaning for people. You know, just like if Rudolph Valentino now is really dead. You know, his memory is gone.
And that took a while, I suppose.
Yeah, right. Where, but Elvis was bigger as had more love and had more attention from more people when he was alive than any other person. I mean, the stories about him are just absolutely incredible.
I'm sure. Well, until next year, I guess. Thank you all for being with us. Gail Brewer-Giorgio, Pete Peterson from Vanderbilt University, and Elvis, Rick Saucedo. We'll be back with Nightwatch.
Good.
Thank you.
Jack always has the recipe for fun.
You are looking at the Galloping Gourmet of 1980.
Just take 3 half-baked roommates, a splash of aged wine.
Now for my special touch, I'll need some breadcrumbs.
I think I have some in my bed.
Never mind.
And watch things simmer for half an hour. It doesn't get any better than this.
This is horrible.
Three's Company for a late-night treat, weeknights at 11:30 on KDK TV2. The situation is critical.
Oh, I give up, John. That really gets me sick.
Hey, Bob, you're not that bad, really.
Oh, right, John. That's why when I was swinging, I saw out of the corner of my eye that you were laughing at me.
Hysterically, but not in front of your face. I would never do that.
Sure, John. Remember, if you have an ailment, we have the cure for you, the golf doctor. Send in the symptoms, and we'll make an appointment for you.
Hey, your sickness isn't going to cure itself. Right, Bob?
Jason Breen's accomplishments in the United States Navy make the folks back home feel proud.
I think he was looking for a vocation. You know what I mean by a vocation. Not a job, not just a way to make a living and put a roof over your head and food on the table.
Jason found his niche in the Navy insofar as they gave him a highly technical, challenging learning process, and now he's mastered something, and of course he's confident.
He always comes back and tells us all these wonderful, wonderful stories and adventures and different people he's met and places, you know, that he's been.
He learned so much so quickly because of the intensity of the naval training that gave him confidence. Suddenly, he was yards ahead of other people.
The Navy gave us the son we knew we had.
Jason Breen is just one of over 500,000 people who are protecting you, representing you, making your country proud. The United States Navy. It's your Navy.
Evening News.
That's our broadcast for Tuesday. Coming up tomorrow, former Secretary of Transportation Elizabeth Dole talking about the Republican Party and women. Gary Wills talking about George Bush, a psychological profile. And in Washington, Sanford Unger, Dean of the School of Communication at American University. Sandy will be talking to a number of people, including former Major League great Harmon Killebrew. Until then, for all of us at Night Watch, I'm Charlie Rose in New Orleans.
There's an awful lot of competition out there, so getting people to notice you can be tough. But if you think using smokeless tobacco is the way to do it, you'd better think twice, because smokeless tobacco can give you cancer. Cancer of the tongue, the gums, the mouth. You could end up facing life without a cheek or a jaw. And just imagine how tough that would be.
Every woman knows that a good diet, medical care, and exercise can make you look and feel better. It's a good idea at any age. But there comes a time when taking care of yourself is not just for looks. After age 55, a woman's risk of heart attack triples. Find out what you can do today. Call the American Heart Association.
This morning on Night Watch, George Bush, the real story.
I don't happen to believe that the vice presidential running mate choice is the main story of this convention. I think the main story is George Bush's acceptance speech Thursday night. He must stand and deliver.
A Cajun cook.
The food of gods, they say in the South.
You gotta have, you know, that's where gumbo got his name from.
From okra?
From okra, yeah. The Africans, his name for okra is gumbo.
Is Elvis alive?
Well, I believe there is enough evidence, certainly, to raise the question. I haven't personally seen him. I've talked to people who said they have seen him.
A lot of people like seeing the aura about Elvis.
For many people, whether he's dead or alive isn't the ultimate question. For them, he is alive in a very special way.
Also, an insider looks at Bush strategy, the Reagan speech and reaction, Olympic skater Dan Jansen, and rejoining the Koreas. Now in New Orleans, here is CBS News correspondent Charlie Rose.
Good morning. The Republican National Convention in New Orleans has opened. The president has come here. He has spoken a kind of farewell to these delegates. He has appeared here before. To put this whole convention in a kind of framework, we have invited Dan Rather to, in his studio, inaugurate our coverage of the Republican Convention. It's a pleasure to have you back on the broadcast.
Glad to be here, Charlie.
Put it in a framework for us, talking about this speech tonight first, and then the selection of the vice president, what George Bush has to do, and some other issues.
Well, first of all, the speech tonight was vintage Ronald Reagan. Let's face it, Ronald Reagan could read the phone book in this hall to these conventioneers, and they would love it. He didn't do that. He pulled together bits and pieces from the best of Ronald Reagan's speeches, delivered it magnificently, as he always does. Now, and the response was a predictable, very enthusiastic. However, the acoustics were not good in the hall, and it never really reached the best moment that they had hoped for. It certainly met well above their minimum standard, but not their best moment, perhaps partly because the speech could not be heard in all parts of the hall.
Interesting you say that, because I wondered as I walked through the hall and felt this large place, enormous compared to what the Democrats had, whether it was playing differently at home than it was as I saw it on the floor with those delegates.
Very good point, because, you know, I simply don't know. I do know that Ronald Reagan has the ability to connect with people at home in their living room. My guess is that it did. Now, for the week as a whole, Ronald Reagan has been the star of this show for 3 consecutive runs, 3 Republican conventions. Tonight's speech was designed to segue him into the supporting role. He's done that successfully. Part of what he wanted to do was tee up the important moment of this convention, which will be Thursday night. I don't happen to believe that the vice presidential running mate choice is the main story of this convention. I think the main story is George Bush's acceptance speech Thursday night. He must stand and deliver at that time. He must convince people that he has a vision, must tell them who and what he is, and that he has to deal with his own L word, the leadership word, and show he's got it. I think he can do that. But that makes Thursday night very important. Selection of a vice presidential candidate. Look, the polls point to Robert Dole. The question is whether the Bushes can get comfortable running with the Doles. If they think they can, then the decision will be made, or already has been made, that it'll be Bob Dole. If not, then, and comes consideration of Kemp, Domenici, possibly a great surprise. That's where that story is.
Yeah.
It's Bob Dole's to lose in the running mate category at the moment.
And we don't know at this moment whether the vice president even made the decision.
No, but I think he has, and that's not just a guess. There are some indications that he has made the decision. For one thing, he himself said that he wanted to have the decision made before he came to New Orleans. Now, he arrives here tomorrow. I think the decision has been made. Talks started tonight. You know, they're orchestrating this very well. That we may begin to get a sense of, at least a sense of who it is on Wednesday night. Remember that the same people who produced these conventions for Ronald Reagan in the past are producing this one. And you remember that in 1980, Ronald Reagan came to the hall on Wednesday night and made the announcement.
What's interesting to me is that he said he's going to announce it on Thursday morning, when he therefore faces the possibility of this election intruding on his speech.
And that's one reason I think they're beginning to open the option, at least, of doing it on Wednesday night, because they know that his speech is very important. It's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for him. Now, the other running stories here are the right of the party trying their best to pressure George Bush, everything from his vice presidential nominee. They would prefer Kemp over Dole, as they've made repeatedly clear, but also the tone and texture of the campaign. They want to affect that. And the other story is the beginnings of a heavily negative campaign, a heavy attack on Michael Dukakis, with beginning very soon, Ronald Reagan as a designated hitter. That, to me, was one of the best stories of Monday, the first day of the convention, Charlie, was the strategy has been settled on for at least the short run. George Bush is going to run with Ronald Reagan. He's going to have Ronald Reagan put his arm around him, and Ronald Reagan is going to be the guy who hits out at Michael Dukakis quite a bit, and they think quite effectively. And as a matter of fact, I think so as well. So I think that's the framework that we're working with here, those four major stories.
Ronald Reagan seemed to indicate he will do that with relish from his speech tonight.
And we know he's very good at it. He's able to do it with a smile. He's able to make people feel that there's nothing mean about it, that he's giving just the facts, ma'am.
Any sense of the Republican strategy in terms of the campaign coming out here? I mean, Michael Dukakis has said that he is going to go for 50 states. Bush knows now that he's got to compete in Texas. Is there, coming out of this convention, any real feeling for their strategy in terms of putting together the electoral
I think it is.
majority?
I think their strategy is pretty much what it has been the last two elections, and that is to do very well in the West, which they can do. California is important to them. West, Midwest, and South. They do that, as they've done in the last two elections, and they're home free. Now, under that strategy, they could still lose Texas and lose quite a bit in the Northeast. They can't afford to lose much of anything in the Midwest. And we know from the polls that George Bush at the moment is weak in the Midwest, for example, including in southern Illinois, very important state for them.
The best argument for Robert Dole.
A good argument for Dole, certainly.
Yeah. Looking ahead at the people that will be involved in this kind of campaign, what does Jim Baker bring?
Jim Baker brings nearly everything. One, brilliance. Two, managerial skills. Three, savvy. Four, credibility. Also a sense of timing. You know, Jim Baker wasn't by accident that he came on as campaign manager just as George Bush kind of bottomed out at the polls, and in the polls, and starts to come back up. Listen, Jim Baker's good presidential temper. We all know that. And if anybody can pull George Bush through, Jim Baker could do it. But I think Baker himself would say, listen, nobody can pull George Bush through. He's got to pull himself through.
And Thursday night is his moment.
I think it is.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks for having me.
CBS News anchorman Dan Rather from his anchor booth. Nightwatch continues. Back in a moment.
I am proud that a great man, George Bush, will be our candidate for the next president of the United States. Thank you.